I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. And I feel the vibe. I'm going to go fast. But first I want to ask, how many of you, by a show of hands, work for a small organization? And by that I mean you might have 5 job titles. Okay, good. So the talk is largely targeted to you folks, but I think in some ways the activities that the Genetic Society of America journals do can actually scale up. And we can talk about that a little bit, and maybe not till the break if you want to talk a little more with me. The Genetic Society of America is a 5,500 member scholarly society formed quite some time ago. And we serve model organism population and human geneticists. And what model organisms? They're critters like mice and Drosophila and yeast and things like that. That basically basic science organisms. So the GSA, like many scholarly societies, has a myriad of core activities ranging from our journals and meetings to awards, lots of advocacy, and work with early career scientists. For the purposes of my talk, I'm just going to focus on the journals because we are publishers. But I do want to point out that, like many of you, we have multiple audiences with many needs and many desires, often at cross purposes with one another and with even our own mission. And so it's like many of you, we've got to satisfy everybody, and that's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes engagement is easy, and I put this up because this is one of the fun parts about our organization is that we do get to interact with outreach in terms of young kids. And what's better than a 5-year-old who thinks everything is cool? And so they want to learn how to build a fruit fly, and they want to learn about genetics, and it's easy and it's fun. It's not quite as easy with a postdoc who's working 100 hours a week and is trying to write 3 papers and satisfy her PI. So our engagement challenges are, and again, like many of you, how do we actually reach multiple disparate audiences in this really fast-paced environment with very little budget? My colleagues that spoke before me, their presentations were so good and they do so many things, and I'll bet their budget's like 100 times what we have. And in fact, when I started, I didn't have any budget for marketing and promotion. And so it was a good thing that I had a marketing degree because I could at least fall on that for some ideas. And so our challenge is sort of further complicated by the fact that we have a small organization with a small staff, and we've got to sort of do a little bit of everything. But we do need to affect the community in measurable, actionable ways. And make no mistake, we are small, but we need to be systematic and agile. And in many ways, much more so than large organizations, because we really have we have a lot to lose, and very quickly. So our culture is fickle, as you all know, much more so than 10 or 20 years ago. And again, the playing field isn't level. And so how do we, as a small organization, cultivate loyalty and get what you would say, repeat authors, repeat readers, repeat customers, and differentiate ourselves from our competition? Our space, genetics and genomics and life sciences, is extremely competitive. Perhaps one of the most, and so it requires us to be pretty on the ball. And finally, we have 2 journals. One is Genetics, and that's 100 years old this year, and the editor-in-chief is actually in the audience. So I have a show and tell for you. And we have a 5-year-old journal, G3, which is an open access journal that's doing quite well. But the challenge for us is, how do you reposition a 100-year-old journal as hip? And why we needed to do that was because our readers were telling us things that, David Kidder talked about truth. And our readers were saying, gosh, genetics is so slow. And we're like, well, gosh, is 30 days to first decision not fast enough for you? And it's like, oh, well, we didn't know that. Like, we're thinking of genetics from 20 years ago. And so, this re-education process is pretty important. And one of the things I think, and again, I think this is this can be scalable, that we try to build a culture where everyone is attentive to the readers and the reviewers. And we have about 200 editors, and I like to say they're like the Navy SEALs of scholarly publishing, because every single one of them just about will go to the wall for authors. And the ones that don't last very long with us. And because we really have a responsibility as colleagues and community members to treat people well. And you're going to hear a lot of buzzwords, right, at this conference, and we take it really seriously in terms of how you treat people. I was thinking David Kidder was talking about the idea of owning something. And it's a term that we flip around, but the fact is you got to be all in, and we are all in, because this is the only way that as a small organization that we can succeed. So like my colleagues that spoke before me, we have activities, we created a blog, and we help authors promote work and create their brand. We do have some fun images. And we also, and again, this, for a small organization, this means that even though I'm the executive editor, so I'm in charge of subscriptions and also like a little bit of marketing and ethics and journal policy and author interventions. So I mean, everybody has to be sort of good at everything. And when we help our, we have a pretty active social media following. We have about 8,000 followers, which is pretty good for us. And we make sure that we help our authors promote their own work. Rather than, again, as we were talking about, it's one thing for us to say rah, rah, but we really want them to say it right. So this is one of the things, again, I think this can be scalable, maybe not for PLOS, but for us, it is about paying attention and listening to what folks have to say, and turning the pain points into opportunities. We actually, our editor-in-chief, Mark Johnston, who is in the audience, has really transformed the journal during his tenure. He sends a thank you note to each corresponding author each month. He says it takes him a half an hour. And he also changes titles on papers to make those papers more impactful. And so that may seem like, the little engine that could, but the fact of the matter is it's really engendered loyalty to our authors who are like, wow, in a sea of hundreds of thousands of papers and editors, like my stuff is getting seen by the editor-in-chief. So I think the other thing is that we do things like 7-day, 12-hour staffing, and things like editor outreach with problem papers. And again, if you're a big organization, that might be easy to do, but for us, it's something that we find makes a difference in engendering loyalty. So really quickly, again, we really focus on being a resource and a partner, because our authors today, scientists, just don't have time to learn about every public access policy change that comes up. So basically, our goal, and like Tara was saying, is we want to help them attain maximum impact and educate them about what does impact mean, more than citations, right? And I think our biggest, it's a well-known tenet in psychology that people will do a lot more to avoid pain than they will to go toward pleasure. So we do find those pain points and help solve them, and it's proven for us to be, I think, pretty effective. So I know I'm going sort of a little quickly. We do things like cover art contests, which again, it might seem like a low-hanging fruit, but we get a lot of entries, a lot of loyalty. People love seeing their work on the cover. And again, I mean, it's not just someone publishing one paper with you. It's somebody then becoming a reader, a reviewer, maybe an editor, and talking about your work. So we find that those activities have exponential results. We discuss issues that matter to stakeholders. Because we're a small organization, we don't need to ask lots of people for permission, so we can rely on our instincts, and again, we can be all in. This was an editorial that we wrote, Mark and I wrote some time ago about anecdotes about rising scientists dealing with the impact factor. I would encourage you to look it up if you are interested. It's been a popular and interesting piece. Again, like different ways to showcase work, it's a booklet of highlights, again, which authors really care about, particularly young authors, to be featured as one of a selection of highlighted articles each month or each year means a lot to them. We do solicit testimonials, and it's really wonderful. Like, people get really excited about these sorts of things, and ranging from Nobel laureates to to young scientists. So we run the gamut. This is a post that our editor wrote, How to Write Titles That Tempt. It was applicable across a wide range of science, and that's another thing I would encourage publishers to do, is to publish blog pieces and articles that don't just relate to your community, but can kind of stretch out to other communities as well. I mean, this advice on how to write titles that draw people in could be applicable to engineers or many other kinds of disciplines. So I guess finally I want to say that it takes a village when you're a small organization. And we've been pretty successful at working closely with partners, and we basically volunteer to be betas for just about every technology integrator we can think of. It works for us, it works for them, and it really works for our users. We were the first journals to partner with bioRxiv, and our authors, a segment of them really wanted preprints, and so we gave it a whirl. It's been very successful. So I guess sort of the overarching message that I want to say is, I think regardless of whether you're a small organization or a large, we find, don't not do engagement if you're small. But it really requires a willingness to understand what their truth of what they need, not what we want to sell them. I think this is really the last thing I want to end on is that it does require 100% commitment. And I would encourage all of you that are in a position of hiring that your most important resource, as you know, is your staff. And that 100% commitment has taken us very far. And I think it's, like I said, it sounds like a platitude, but it can be true. So I guess that's it. Have a nice lunch if you I'll be around, and thanks for listening.